In this concluding session on justice, I think it will be better just to take a short summing up about the position that Rawls took. It will be reasonable to conclude that Rawls mixed up libertarianism with economic egalitarianism. So this is the position that he took to build up his theory of justice in a theoretical structural form. Obviously, he placed utmost importance and primacy to liberty and equalization of wealth, social status, and political power. He accepts social stratification and hierarchy as functionally necessary and inevitable, because he was not for populism here. He is a philosopher pointing out the position he prefers to take. He rejected steamrolled equality. That means he rejected any populist totalitarian regimes. He wanted to protect creative individuality through fair equality of opportunity. So I think this is his theoretical or philosophical position, and his basic definition, very pithy statement, that justice as fairness is basically a concept of political culture and not a metaphysical one. He himself clarified later on, not in that book, later on, that his conception of justice is political in nature, in the sense that this sense of justice can be properly appreciated only when we take up a political constitutional setup which will be inducive and congenial for realizing the ideal of justice as fairness. To be fair needs cultural preparation. It is impossible for any people who is not culturally well trained to appreciate the spirit of fairness, to banish bias from his outlook. And therefore, on that ground, he says that a prior requirement of attaining this cultural position is the principle of toleration. You must have appreciate in our present day experience, we find that most of the political problems arise from absence of the spirit of toleration, whether it is communal or it is individual or it is political party, whatever it is. That, my view, is the best. This attitude is most unjust and anti-democratic. If we remember that my view is good to me, but I am prepared to tolerate with, not accept, but tolerate with other views. This is the proper democratic spirit. After a theory of justice published in 1971, there was a lot of debates. And in 1993, he came out with another book, which is also quite famous, Political Liberalism. And there he made this position further clarified, and he insisted that there is something called public reason, not private reason, not private calculations, loss and gain, etc. He said there is a thing, what we may call public reason, and this public reason expects that liberals, anybody who professes to be a liberal, must be a reasonable person in his mental makeup. So, conception of justice according to Rawls should be independent of opposing and conflicting philosophical and religious doctrine. And this he wanted to achieve by overlapping consensus. There must not be any manufactured consensus. Consensus, to be true to its meaning, is always something that naturally evolves, which is shared by all. That is called consensus. But this consensus, now he says, with the adjective, it can overlap. So that, again, I think Rousseau's stint is there, that common good of the society, it must be appreciated, and every effort, by all means, it should be discovered, so that a society or a political system could be said to be just. I think I have explained all his theoretical philosophical positions. If you have any question.
Yes, sir. I would like to ask you that in first class we understood about his theory and system, philosophy of justice. But what system he want to political system he prefer?
You mean political system, constitutional system?
What do he prefer?
It's a very intelligent question, obviously. Now, what I have just said right now in this class points out to the fact that he is for a constitutional democracy. First of all, I again repeat what I frequently say, I profess, that a country cannot call itself democratic only on the ground that elections are held regularly. Election is a requirement, but election is not the soul of democracy. It must be, to be a democracy, must be constitutional democracy, which unfortunately in many of the third world countries it is not there. But Rawls' firm opinion is that a just society has to be a constitutional democracy. Secondly, to be more specific, he cleared his position, say that obviously his preference is for a social democratic welfare state. That means it has to be democratic in spirit, it has to be taking social consequences of political decisions fairly, and thirdly, the general welfare of the society or of the people must be taken into account as a responsibility of the state. This is the position, I think. I hope it satisfies your query. Now, there are people who criticized Rawls. Though I said earlier that Rawls' position is such high in philosophical terms that it is very difficult to ignore him. One may agree or one may not agree. I will show you one by one that there are certain theoretical nuances where critics point out some gaps in Rawls in this sense. It has been pointed out that Rawls initially endeavors to be a contractuarian, that is one who comes to his political philosophy of the state by means of social contract among the people. So whether he was really a contractarian philosopher suffers in the sense that the most significant expression in his logical formulation of his theory of justice is veil of ignorance.
Yes.
It is logically so significant. But the point is that when he talks about the two basic principles, then it is not a question of contract. So somebody has pointed out that I think there is something not logical. If you say my theory contractual, and then what the people will contract. Contract means to give and take. So it is not a question of give and take. It is to arrive at a consensus through the methodology of
discussion.
No.
Negotiation.
Equilibrium.
Equilibrium.
Hmm?
Yes.
Reflective.
Reflective equilibrium.
Okay. So that means very innocent criticism, but still he says that here is the point. Secondly, he has said that sometimes inequality may be consciously practiced, but only when, he makes a clause, only when this unequal treatment to somebody or some section of the society must be justified, that it will go to defend or increase or promote the advantages of the disadvantaged people. It will be to the promotion of their welfare. Only when, to that extent, some unequal treatment may be tolerated and may be justified. For example, government gives scholarship to some sections.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the scholarships money come from general taxation. So taking money from everybody but giving the benefit to a few, there is some element of inequality. But that inequality is justified, morally justified, because it ultimately benefits that section. Now, this is technical, but not technical, but preliminary consistencies lacking or not, this is point. But now I come to a series of modern contemporary philosophers who have challenged Rawls. Challenge means not refuting, but challenge in that grand academic sense. Robert Nozick. Incidentally, Robert Nozick was his colleague in the same university. But still, Robert Nozick, quite young philosopher, very brilliant, but he is a champion of what we call neoliberal political philosophy. That is, Nozick's point is this, that Rawls distributed justice, taking money from some and giving to other, welfare, modern democratic welfare state. This is challenged by Robert Nozick because liberalism, Nozick argues that liberalism goal is the individual. Entire political philosophy of liberalism revolves around the concept the individual, what happens to the individual. But then when he talks about that difference principle, what technically he called it by coining a new term, Minmax, the minimum of the maximization. So these are, according to Nozick, this is not liberal. Then how can we call Robert Rawls' theory a liberal, grand theory of liberal justice? This you get the point. What Robert Nozick wants, what is his goal? He said that my goal is minimal state.
Minimal state.
Minimal state. That means going back to the individualist liberalism, extreme individualist liberalism of the 19th century. That state will have minimum functions. But the welfare state means large number of functions. He said that even Nozick goes to such an extent, he says that distribution taxation is theft. That you are stealing the money from me and giving it to others in the name of welfare.
Yes.
So there is another extreme, what we should say, conservative, liberal, but very extreme conservative variety.
So state should just remain silent.
No, he said it is not the concern of the state, isn't it?
Let the individual
Not
decide.
silent or vocal. It is not your field. It is not your function. State function is to defend the individual, maintain his dignity. That's all. So this is minimal. This is technique. His words, you should be acquainted with it. Minimal state. Now a conservative egalitarian, Ronald Dworkin, American. His criticism is Rawls has given us a system of just society, a just state, a theory of justice. But there can be an alternative way of resource distribution, which has not been taken account of by Rawls. That is, Dworkin says, that is the method whereby each person would be both content with his lot and at the same time able to take responsibility for satisfying his choice and securing his welfare. Dworkin argument is we should devise such a economic system, such a social system, such a system of administration, such fiscal and others, where each person on his own will be able to make his choice and feel secure and dignified. His criticism, in other words, is that state should not interfere, that you should eat there such and such thing, this and this is, isn't it? It is not in the books, not in the writing of them, but it comes to mind now that I think Robert Nozick and Dworkin both will reject midday meal scheme in the philosophical system.
Yes.
Why state sends the money?
Let them
Who
do
will
it.
get what kind of nutrition? This is another completely alternative way. Let us make the economy work in such a way that they will themselves feel that we need this nutrition, we should need this dress, anything, any choice. Choice is the grand thing in democracy.
They will
But there
enjoy
is no
it.
choice,
Yes.
that regime is not democracy. Now we come to an Indian economist, Bhabatosh Datta. He appreciated Rawls' general approach, but as an economist he says that what Rawls could have considered is to suggest some distributive method whereby the gap between the rich and the poor could be shorter without doing any disadvantage either to the rich or to the poor. There is the common saying that as development takes place, growth takes place, rich gets richer,
The poor gets poorer.
poor gets poorer. The second part is not true always. Everybody gains. But the degree to which rich gets richer is much higher than the degree by poor gets richer.
Richer.
Is it?
Yes.
This is just an economic theory point of view, Professor Bhabatosh Datta's. Next, we should take note of also Amartya Sen, who is not only a welfare economist but also a social philosopher. Amartya Sen's argument is this: for removing social disabilities. By this he means, for example, environmental degradation. No individual is responsible for this. He has not created it. It is the general society which has done it. Or gender bias. It comes from the social environment. It comes from tradition. It comes from something for which individual concern is not responsible. One individual cannot create gender bias. It requires a tradition,
A structure.
isn't it?
Yes.
Cultural value system, etc. So this he calls social disabilities. And he talks of natural disadvantages also. For example, physical deformity, handicapped, etc. Now, that person concerned is not responsible. He is born with this. So these are the natural. If somebody is born blind, but still he has got the right to lead his life in a dignified way in a democracy. So natural disadvantages as well as social disabilities should be removed. But Amartya Sen's complaint is this, that Rawls has not thrown his attention to this. They are not rejecting Rawls as such, but they are showing shortcomings or less attention of Rawls, etc. And then the three other main viewpoints. I am not talking of one individual economist or philosopher. For example, Communitarianism. That is a group of contemporary liberal theorists who think that every person, every human being is the product of his community culture. It is impossible for a person to come out of it community tradition and community values. So if that is destroyed, then that has to be protected by the state. But Rawls has not given attention to this. This is one. Second is, you are, I hope, girls of modern generation, you are accustomed with the word radical feminism.
Yes, radical feminism.
The radical feminist point of view is this, that liberalism is totally inadequate. The general liberal political philosophy is totally inadequate to consider the needs and aspirations of females, because it is from the root biased towards the males. And the radicals use the very hard words. They say what we call civilized democratic society is basically a dominated society. So this domination they refute, and naturally, as the Rawlsian state will be a welfare state, that means governed by rules, regulation, this way, that way. He said then again the same psychology comes. So this is a standing criticism. And last of all, naturally, that inevitable Marxist position is there. The Marx never paid any attention or any said a word of appreciation about liberal concept of justice, because his basic fundamental philosophical approach is what we call classless society. Method is class struggle, and method of distribution is to each according to his need. So according to his needs, unequal, but it has to be based and backed up by a suitable socialist philosophy or socialist culture. Until that is grown up consciously, there cannot be question of any justice as such. So this is the various, very fundamental. All of them, I hope you have seen, all of them are relevant criticisms or just drawing to the attention of some lapses on the part of Rawls. Rawls have tried to answer them for the rest of his life to these criticisms. But anyway, we can conclude our discussion by noting that, first of all, that Rawls Marx said watershed mark. Secondly, his theory can be criticized but can hardly be ignored. Thirdly, his pragmatic concept of overlapping consensus is basically a political one, and it underlines the need of social coexistence and peace. In fact, in his last days of his life, he was very much concerned with world peace. And incidentally, I refer to. And Rawls' difference principle, that is taking from the rich and giving it to the poor, has been ignored in practical policy making in the third world in the context of globalization of our time. We feel there is no harm in saying so as an academic. We feel that contemporary politics of India is totally a victim of globalization, where the state policy is hardly conducive to the real empowerment of the people. There may be grandiose schemes, but that is all administered schemes. But empowering the individual with his dignity protected, that is lacking almost in all developing countries or third world countries, as we say. I think here we can call a day, hoping that on my part that at least some basic understanding about justice has been conveyed to you.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.